Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I am honored to have my guest. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Well, let me start this by saying I'm honored to be here with you. I think you're a superstar. I'm definitely a fan. And so thanks for inviting me here to this production, which I think is just going to blow up. It's just going to keep going. My name is J.D. Fuller, J. Denise Fuller. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a small private practice and a full-time job in a school as a counselor and a podcast, Change the Narrative with J.D. Fuller. And I also am an adjunct professor. And I do consultations for people who desire to be anti-racist in their mental health practice.
That's a lot, JD. I didn't know about that second part.
Now you know why I'm running late and trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be.
You're doing it all, balancing all the things. I don't know if you've ever seen the halftime show at like a basketball game, and you always see the person that's spinning the plates on the stick, and they run around and they spin the plates, but they got to keep running to keep it up.
Yes.
Yeah. You're doing it all, JD, and so hats off to you.
Well, thank you for being so gracious with understanding my slips and my bumps and spills. I really appreciate that.
100%. So listen, I'm gonna dive right in. We're gonna dive into the deep end of the pool, and we'll see how we do here. This side of, I'm not gonna say the end because that's not true, but this side of the pandemic, we have seen an increase of behaviors.
Yeah.
Unwanted, I'm going to say, behaviors. I'm going to say behaviors that teachers are having a hard time managing. We're seeing teachers leaving the workforce, leaving the profession as a result of these things. We're really seeing the pandemic almost exacerbated the loss of humanity in education. And I'm looking at the landscape, and it just feels like people wanted to, if you remember, like, old school Atari or old school Nintendo, and you hit the reset button, there was no save. You couldn't go back to where you were. You started off right back at the beginning. Don't let the Nintendo overheat. It is a wrap. It's over for you. You got to start back at the beginning, right? Like, let me just go here for a quick second. Like, I remember as a kid playing Mike Tyson's Punch Out. It was my game. I finally got to Mike Tyson. I'm about to punch him. He's about to knock me out because it's one hit and he's done. But I punch him, and you get those pink and green lines across that let you know everything overheated. That right there is where our schools are. It is overheated, and we're just trying to hit the reset button. And I'm like, my God, this is what we're going to do. You're not going to try to fix the system. Mm-hmm. You're not going to try to change anything. We're just going to hit reset. Mm-hmm. And so I want you to jump in here. Like, has that been your experience as a person who is a licensed clinical social worker? You have a very different lens and a lens I think is needed in this conversation. So talk to me about what you're seeing.
You know, you hit the nail on the head when you say people want to reset. Let's just come back and almost act like the pandemic didn't happen. And so we're so happy back. Let's just make it happen. And what educators are not realizing is that there's literally 2 years lost emotionally, developmentally, academically. These are not the, say, ninth grader entering. This student is still in the middle school, functioning in a lot of social emotional ways that are middle school. And so that misnomer is problematic. The belief that we can just come back and reset is not just problematic. It's a hindrance. It's a barrier. Additionally, the adults aren't role modeling the reset.
That part. Say it again.
The adults are not coming back and resetting. So what makes you think someone with a less developed emotional capability is coming back to reset? So we have to role model what it is you want. The excitement about being in school and being an educator has been lost in systems that have been corrupted. And that have always been corrupted, that are really showing their corruption now. So, fixing the system doesn't want to be fixed. There's all kinds of things in place to keep the system the way it is. But what used to override that is the person who wanted to become the teacher so badly, they figured out what that meant for them in their space, how to be who they wanted to be to kids, for kids. That's why I became a clinician, because I wanted me growing up. And so
Yeah.
that's what got me into it. That's what kept me going. But I think, unfortunately, like you said, the vulnerability of people's mental health anyway, in a world that's constantly showing its, who it is,
Yeah.
has impacted the adults as much as the children. And the reset is not an option.
I think that's spot on. And with that, it has been this. I want to go to something you said that was so key is now the corruption of these systems are coming to fruition. We're seeing it more. In my head, I think of pictures a lot. And so one of the things that come to my mind is like when somebody is sick and they are battling, whether it be the flu or cold or whatever, they will inevitably take Theraflu or
Yeah.
they'll take Dayquil and NyQuil. And what those will do is mask the symptoms. Meanwhile, the disease is still continuing to be replicated in your body and things like that. What you really need is, if it's a virus, you need to rest and let your antibodies do its work and things like that. If it's a bacteria, you need antibiotics. You need something that's going to get to the root.
Mhm.
And what has happened is in education, we have continued to take Dayquil. Oh, okay. Well, let's change the way that our classes look. Okay, let's change the amount of time and instruction. Let's add in this magical land called SEL learning. Let's continue to put, to borrow from the adage, a band-aid on this gaping wound and hope it works out.
Mhm.
And we're seeing it's not working.
It's not working.
And people who are working in this field, who are trying to bring awareness and skills and competencies and encouragement in doing this work, like yourself and me, I almost feel like we're Chicken Little. Like we're telling people the sky is falling and nobody's believing us.
Let me tell you, but I felt like last year, I felt like the biggest pain in everybody's butt because I must have said 5 million times to every parent, teacher, anybody who would listen, your child, this child is not who you think they are. The pandemic keeps on giving. And they take it in, but it's not being experienced the way it's being presented. And you said something that I want to speak to, which is behaviors. We are a behavior obsessed academic system.
That's
And,
good.
and here's the thing. A
Yeah.
behavior is, like you said, a symptom. A child does not have the emotional capability, the age they are at, to say, hey, emotionally, I'm feeling this and I feel a little triggered by that. And so as a result of that, I'm going to do this. You have to look at what is being done and investigate it in a way that's collaborative.
Yeah.
Teachers get offended. They take it personally.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a war. And you're going to lose, teachers. You're going to lose. I'm here to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm on the the quote unquote dark side now of school leadership, and I am for my teachers 100% because I have to be for them to be for my students. It just has to be that way.
Of course.
I refuse to do the toxic habit of choosing between the two.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not a choice I'm willing to make. We're going to be both, and we're going to normalize that, right? Problem with that is, when folks have this either or experience, or where they feel like it's pie. If I give here, I'm going to take away from there, and all of these different things, right? So to your point, what happens is the focus on behavior makes me think of. Have you ever seen His Dark Materials?
No.
Okay, so first of all, let me just warn you. I didn't know. I watched it, and by the end of the it's like I think 3 or 4. It's short. It's like maybe 6 seasons or something. By the end of it, I'm sobbing. Oh yeah. So just bring tissues if you watch it. But in it, this young girl has this codex, if you will, called an alethiometer. And in it, because of her gifting, she can read this thing and be able to tell you what's going to happen, the answer to certain questions. It communicates the deepest longings of the person. So you don't have to wonder. You don't have to get to the bottom of it. No, just ask the alethiometer. And I feel like schools want an alethiometer with kids. We want to get to the quick, easy fix. That's what we want. And we don't understand that all behavior is communicating something. It is communication. Are we willing to speak the language of our kids and understand, listen, that prefrontal cortex, that thing ain't fully developed. They are going to make some radical to you choices. And to them, it makes total sense.
Mhm.
But are we willing to break out our codex and say, okay, what is it that you're really trying to? Are we willing to bring humanity back and say, no, this is a young person dealing with something. Let's get to the root, rather than punishing what I don't understand.
So you say, trying to communicate something. I think the obsession is, what are you trying to communicate, rather than clearly you're communicating something. Let's collaborate. Let me sit here with you and figure out what comes up for you. Teachers, academia thinks in problem solution. And
Yeah.
so the tendency is that we have a problem. It's the behavior. What is wrong with you? Let me get to the solution. Let's move on. I got to get to this lesson. And I understand it. Believe me, I have great compassion and empathy for teachers. I know they are stretched beyond belief. So this is not about attacking teachers. It's about asking adults to adult, and stop asking kids to adult, because they cannot. That's what it's about. The collaboration needs to be led with compassion and empathy, and realize that the more you're willing, the more likely you'll get to move the process forward. Quick example is that, teachers will come to me and say, this kid's doing this. What's wrong? What should I do? Well, how about we bring the child in, if they're old enough, and have a conversation, because I might hear something you're not hearing, and then I can try to help move it around. That's a foreign concept. I once had a teacher tell me, I've never had a school counselor do this before. Well, I'm sorry about that. I've been doing this off and on for 30 years in school. And I absolutely, this is the only way I work, is collaboratively. So it becomes an ego, right?
Yeah.
It becomes about the teachers or the adult's ego
Yep.
versus the kid's vulnerability.
And when we think of students, I heard somebody say this and it struck deep. And they said, the thing we fail to admit is that children are an oppressed people group. And it resonated so deeply, because we think about it, we will tell strictly because of their age. Nothing about their humanity, nothing about their personhood, strictly because of their age. Listen, you can't talk now. You can't ask questions. You better not question me. You better listen to what I say. And matter of fact, the whole reasoning for this is because I'm older than you. I know a lot of old fools.
Yeah.
And so since when has the length of time on earth been the sole reason for having some type of authority over? So we don't recognize the genius, we don't recognize the beauty and even the sophistication, if you will, of our students. We don't think we have anything to learn from them.
And that's a problem. I'm going to jump in there because you said,
please,
I don't want to lose them. One is that they are oppressed population. Two is that they are an impulsive oppressed population. And that's a bad combination. So much research has been done on the impulsivity of kids. And I know that I've interviewed myself working for the county, offenders who were a child when they, like an adolescent, when they offended, and they came out as an adult, and they are two different people. That adult cannot even recall what happened and why. Why it made sense at the time to murder that person, because it didn't make sense. And they know that as an adult because they have an adult brain. But as an adolescent, they had impulsivity and they had feelings of being oppressed. And so they had to show somebody something. So that part is a tough combination, those two. The other thing is that I have people say all the time who don't have as many degrees as you and I have. Just because you have a degree doesn't mean you know everything. No, it doesn't mean I know everything. But it does mean I go out of my way to try to know a lot. So to try to discount me because you've had life experience and I have degrees and life experience, it works against us. And that's what happens, the paradigm that you're speaking of, right? This idea that I'm the adult, I have this, so I know. No, how about what we know together? Because chances are, particularly in public schools, and not only in public schools, believe me, very pervasive in private schools as well, these kids have trauma. You see every day what they see on social media. You know, or should know, it impacts you. What do you think it does to the underdeveloped mind of an impulsive, feeling oppressed child? And they bring that into the classroom, and then you shut it down. You shouldn't give it all the attention, but you also don't need to shut it down.
To do that, though, requires a critical love, a critical humility, even. And so I tell teachers all the time, but what if we embodied a restorative mindset? What could it look like if a child comes into your classroom, and instead of already having your rules posted, you labor together to create what this
Exactly.
space looks like.
Exactly. Exactly.
What if, and I want you to jump in, please, but what if we said, okay, in this space, there are going to be some things that I know that you don't. And I'm going to ask you to lean in and take a learner stance here for me.
Hmm.
Why is that important? Because I'm trying to put you up on game.
But
I
also, let me just add
please.
one piece there. Also, I'm going to role model that for you.
Yes. Yes. I'm not going to just have these uncommunicated expectations. I'm going to demonstrate, show, coach, reaffirm, reteach, recoach, because I know along the way what you have, how you're coming to, because of your developmentally where you are. We're going to need to revisit these things,
Hmm.
and I'm going to give you space to have to relearn them.
Yeah, and also look, again, I am pro teacher. I know I
100%.
often don't come off that way, but I am pro teacher. I am challenged by the adult with the ego, and you have to look at when you start taking things personally. I
Yeah.
tell people all the time. I was telling somebody today, like the theme of my clinical work this week has been, it's not personal, it's professional.
Yeah.
Because when you take it into that personal space, like, hurt feelings by a child, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying your feelings can't get hurt, but they're not personally hurting you. They're hurting.
Yeah.
Hurt people,
Hurt
and
people
little
hurt
people hurt
people.
people all the time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just to consider that, if you can put that through a professional, filter, if you will, and just see something's going on here. I've triggered this person, they're triggering me. Let's slow down. Let's figure it out in a way that's collaborative, just in the way that you've mentioned. That's a style that's really beneficial.
And when you do that, I think a couple things happen, because the second part of that is you get to say to your student, because of your understandings of the world, because of where you are, because maybe you live in this space that I teach in, you actually live here. So you have a lived experience that I don't have.
Mhm.
I'm going to learn from you, and that's going to be valuable in this space. So I'm going to ask you to teach me, to show me, to be honest with me. And I'm going to coach you on what that looks like,
Mhm.
because we can't just show up without some type of understanding of what those norms and expectations are going to be. Is that all right? How do you feel about that?
You know,
Right?
so when I coach parents or do therapy with parents, it's constantly your child is going to teach you how to parent them.
Mm,
That does not mean your child runs the household and tells you what to do.
mm-mm.
They're going to show you what they need. But if you're constantly telling them what you got that you didn't want, that you're trying to give them, you're going to miss the cues that they're giving you. And I invite teachers to see that the same way. Your
Mm,
students are going to tell you how to teach them. And their expectations of themselves or their desires for a math grade may not be what you think they can do as a math teacher.
yeah,
And that's where you have to figure out how to meet halfway. Their
yeah,
grade is not necessarily an insult to you. It
yeah,
might just be how they feel about math and that it
yeah,
doesn't work for them the way it makes sense to you. Does that make
yes.
sense?
And if you create the space, the community aspect of that space,
Mhm.
they will tell you long before you have to actually see it on a report card,
Or they're
or you
acting out in their behavior.
either right. And so now it becomes a lot harder to harm or to disrupt in ways that are counterproductive,
Yes.
because we actually care about this. But I want to ask you a question. I want to push our conversation for those who may be listening and say, but listen, everything that you're saying, right, it sounds great.
Hmm.
But I got this curriculum. I got a boss breathing down my neck in the form of a principal. I got to get through this pacing guide. You don't understand my time constraints, and I can't devote all of my time to this one, two, three, or four students who are demanding so much attention.
Hmm.
So, what do you say to that teacher who's like, listen,
Yeah.
I can't do all that. You have some pie in the sky kind of hope. You're
Mhm.
not talking to me.
So I want to ask them first, just what I ask my clients. How's that working for you now?
Mm,
How's that plan of pushing forward and pushing through working for you now? Because if it's working for you, then I'm what I have to say is useless. If
Yeah.
it's not working for you, then we have to revisit something that sounds like I have goals that I have to reach, as well as how do I move these children forward? Because they're not all going to move together. They're just not. And let
Yeah.
me tell you, those 4 kids can shut down a whole class. They can shut it down,
100%.
and you'll get nowhere, and you'll do nothing,
Yeah.
and you'll end up getting burned out and quit.
Yep.
Because social emotional learning is now a part of the lingo, and I'm convinced that people don't really understand what that means. It means that
Absolutely not.
if you are not socially and emotionally in place, the learning's not going to happen.
Yes. Yes.
So I need to know, how's what you're doing working for you now? Because
Yeah.
then if you recognize it's not working, then that's where the collaborative process comes in, to figure out how to move the pieces around so you get more of that progress you seek.
I would agree with that. I think sometimes teachers, educators in the classroom, right, we might forget that we're part of a larger story. Here's what I mean. A student comes to the classroom. They're obviously disheveled. Something's gone wrong. They arrive to you with a certain attitude or a certain whatever, but that didn't start with you.
Exactly.
Something happened prior to you. And what you do in this moment will either add or subtract from what they're feeling right now. And oftentimes I have teachers, I won't say all of them, right? But there's some that will set the stage, turn the stage lights on, put the spotlight on the student, and then get mad at the show that they see. Well, if you did all of the things to create this environment where the show is going to be seen, then the student isn't to blame for that. That's you. Now, I say all of that, and it seems like I could hear an educator who's listening, like, Bobby, I thought you were now you're coming at me. No, what I'm saying is, and let me phrase it this way. So I'll tell on myself, JD,
Mhm.
and then I want you to advise me, and thereby help out those who are listening.
I feel you.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a real life example. I was in a classroom, teaching math, 7th grade. One of the students has his head down, disconnected, whatever. I refuse. I believe in you. We're going to do this. Now I can help you where you are, but what I can't do is have you fall asleep as though you can't do it. Or though, and not to say that, now mind you, I knew it wasn't like he was tired, working late, nothing like that. Like we already had a rapport. Fast forward the story. He's obviously checked out. He's not going to do it. And he is charismatic and funny, and everybody loves him. So he says a bunch of funny things that have people bust out laughing, and the instruction is lost for the next 5 to 8 minutes. Long time in class. I asked him to step outside so we could talk. I had my co-teacher kind of take the lesson, and I go outside and talk to him. I was raised in a military family.
Oh, I get that.
In a military family, that means you look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. You give me a firm handshake. Yes, sir. No, sir. There is an obvious distinction in how we relate to one another because authority trickles down. That is just how it works. I come to it with that understanding. The young man does not look me in the eye. The young man there is no yes, sir, no, sir. And I can tell you why, like now looking back, but I'm going to pause the story right there.
Okay.
Talk to me.
Jump in. Okay. So first, I hate the word mistake, but kind of first
Please.
mistake was confronting him in the class, right? The adolescent ego will never tolerate that. You embarrass me, I'm going to embarrass you twice as much, particularly if I'm charismatic and I have a skill set.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I wouldn't have let him sleep it off, and found a way to have a conversation with him outside of the ring, outside of the stage, because you've just put pressure on yourself and you put pressure on him. And he's got a lot of peer pressure.
Yeah.
Everybody's watching to see how he's going to react.
Yeah.
And he has no choice but to one up you. And then you get out in the hallway, he's embarrassed because he likes you.
Yeah.
And he just acted like he didn't like you.
Yeah.
And so now he doesn't have the developmental capabilities to say, hey, I know it went down in there. It's not really about me and you, but I had to save face. That's not going to happen. So now he's got to shut down because he's got to leave the building because emotionally he can't tolerate what's happening right in front of your very eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where timing is everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's 1 out of 20 kids not paying attention, teach the 20. Get back to the one and try to see if you can figure out what's going on to bring them along. But when
Yeah.
you stop, you've now set up a scenario where it's you against him.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what I've learned since that moment. And this was several years ago at this point, but one, I would have, even if I asked to want to talk to him, I would have gone and just either slipped a little note on his desk, or I would have whispered to him while kids were working on something. So it took, it wouldn't have been all eyes on him at the moment on which I asked him. Right.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing for a kid. And there's a lot of stuff happening in middle school where that's just not going to fly. Right. So I've learned that. Here's the other thing I've learned. If a kid is dealing with shame, the last thing they want to do is look at the person that they harmed. Right. And so for him, not looking at me was a sign of respect and care.
Well, then you're looking at the cultural piece, right? And I'm not just saying African American culture. I'm saying
no, because we were both black,
that's what I'm saying.
And yet and still we like and I want to say this, and I want you to jump in. I want everybody from the Liberation Lab community, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Because you are similar in race does not mean that you do not that you don't have to build the cultural competency with your student, because we're talking about generational divides. We're still talking about cultural divides, despite where we may have come from. And I really need us to lean in and have a learner stance. Please jump in.
Well, so it's a diaspora. You're talking about diaspora, but you're also talking about family culture. When I'm teaching about culture, we can go through 100 things that are culturally, influenced, right? Yeah. And so that's why the word, I got this from one of my guests on the show, which was, we got to get away from competency. Nobody's competent. We're not culturally competent. It's the cultural awareness. It's cultural patience. And I like now
that's good.
I've started to move that around, because competency sounds like I've arrived, and we're never going to arrive, right? Yeah. So it's much more about culturally aligned attunement, awareness, and so leading with, in my household, when I grew up, this is what about in your household? Now you've just created an exchange. When I grew up, this is what this all meant, but I don't want to assume. Another piece of that I want to jump in is that these kids are not us. I say this repeatedly. These parents are raising kids, and they're trying to do it so differently that they're creating human beings that they don't know what to do with when they don't look like them or act like them.
Yeah.
And does that make sense? And so,
100%.
Okay, so right. So I'm going to give you everything I didn't have. I'm going to, give you all the opportunities to communicate. I'm going to do all these things. Yeah. And then I'm going to stick you in a classroom and assume it's going to translate and it's going to work with the teacher who, whatever their cultural experience, whatever their teaching experience, especially if they're seasoned, they're not trying to recreate the wheel. And then to personalize it, I was a nightmare student. I had so much anxiety. Nobody saw me for who I was. I'll say this all the time. Nobody saw me for who I was. Yeah. My grades didn't reflect it. I was not a teacher's student. I was not. I was fun for my peers, but not academically. And so because nobody saw me, I never got to see myself.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Yeah. You have to see something in a kid. See something in a kid that you can offer it. Because I can't tell you how many times I hear there was this one teacher who saw that eye.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's major, right? I think about, I tell the story all the time for those who've been listening to me, bear with me. But it's my 6th grade year, dealing with a broken home, mom getting divorced. I was angry. And I was one of 2 black students in the honors program. First 3 market periods, B's and C's, not really performing. 4th market period, really bust my tail, get A's and B's, whole 9. The teacher writes on the report card that this student does not belong in the gifted and talented. Right?
Heartbreaking.
My point in sharing that is, at no point did this teacher ever ask me why. At no point did they lean in and say, what's the story behind this? Because all that she cared about was what I could produce and not who I was. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have a lot of educators who have gone through traditional schooling. And when I say traditional schooling, I mean you're in rows, your hand goes up at a certain time. You have to say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. You answer at a certain time, you do a certain thing, and you get rewarded for doing that thing in the way that it has been prescribed.
Right.
Now, if you've been successful, then you're going to wonder why the student isn't being successful because you did it. And I feel like we have to do the work of decentering ourselves and our experience to be able to arrive at a place that understand how this student is arriving in our classroom. What are the, and again, we are in the middle of a story. So even though you have the best intentions, what if the teacher last year was harmful to them and now they're coming in distrusting to you?
Mm-hmm.
It's not personal. And you just represent the thing. Go ahead.
Absolutely. It's not personal, and also intention, right? So I no longer believe in intention, and you and I have talked about that.
Absolutely.
I don't believe in intention. It's all about impact.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what you go in intending to do. If the impact is not working out the way you foresaw it, then there's a problem. It's time to revisit it. And what you're talking about there is less ego and more presence, emotional presence. Now, I'm not talking about the educator who gets overly involved, wants to know the child's entire history, it doesn't have, strong boundaries. You're not talking about that. I'm not talking about that.
Right.
We're just talking about recognizing the whole child as opposed to that math student.
Yes. Yes. And the beauty is when you recognize the whole child, it then bolsters them as that math student.
I wouldn't know. It never happened to me, but I believe
So as we round out our time, I want to ask you a couple of things, right? First, as we are heading or are in, let's say this, as we are in the beginning stages of the school year, because by the time they hear this will be the beginning stages. What, if you could give 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice to educators they could take with them, what would you say?
Fake the funk until you feel the funk. Come back like it's the happiest place you've ever been. So much excitement. I don't care if it's 2 weeks after school has started. If you can show some excitement, it's contagious. With all the ills in the world, with all the problems in the system, you have to role model what you want to see in kids. And sometimes kids will, tease me about bringing too much light to a situation just in a moment. Even if you can just do it in a moment. You don't have to be, the clown, but just show some excitement about what you do and reminding yourself of why you became a teacher. It's contagious. It really is. It really is. Leadership needs to do this. Teachers need to do it. While we're fighting battles on the side, the kids need to see something different, right? You have to show that united front to them. That's one thing. The other thing is take smaller pieces. I know you're not going to get where you need to be. You're not going to get where you need to be by the end of the school year because you're not teaching the students you used to teach.
Yep.
And so you've got to do the best you can to fill the gaps in whatever way you can. And don't take it personally when you don't get there or when it falls a bit short. Collaborate with the kid on how to get somewhere that's further along than where they are right now.
Yep.
And the third thing is to speak up and advocate. Don't sit in silence, but also don't become defensive. Respond with your administrators. Talk about not what the kid did wrong, not what's going wrong, but how can you work together to create an academic environment that's going to get closer to what they need to pay the bills and closer to what you need to feel like you're doing your job responsibly, and also what the kid needs to go into the next phase of their academic experience. Yeah.
I love that. I hope that the community rallies around those points. And I hope that we don't get I would say defensive or triggered when we hear the point about faking the funk, because I know that finding your why and remembering your why has been weaponized and used to belittle all the systemic ills of education. So you're not saying that, I'm not saying that, but at the same time, I will not minimize us recognizing, holding on to, and holding in tension our passion and our purpose as we pursue what learning is going to look like this year.
Listen, nobody in a teacher's body, or even I'm gonna say even an administrator's body, came into this job to be a billionaire. It's not why you did it.
Yeah.
And you have to at some point remind yourself of that pretty frequently, because there's that one kid you're gonna reach, and later on when they're making their speech, they're gonna mention you, and you may not be there for it, but you have to believe that that's true. Yeah. And I say this with, tears in my eyes come up every time I say this. I did not have not one teacher who saw my potential. And I didn't recognize my own potential until graduate school.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I offer that as you can be that person who sees something in a kid that they don't see in themselves, that'll carry them the rest of their academic career, basically.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for sharing space with me. Since we connected, it has been like kindred spirits. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate the things that you share, and this is the first of many collaborations. I'm sure. But for folks who don't know and want to connect and follow and plug into what you're doing, please tell people where to follow you and how to support you.
For sure. I'm on all social media platforms, not so much Twitter because it's ridiculous. I'm doing Threads more than Twitter.
Yeah.
But it's Change the Narrative. Take out the A. Change the Narrative is my Instagram, but also J. Denise Fuller or JD Fuller. You can find me, and I respond to DMs and have conversations with people. And, like you said, kindred spirits, I definitely feel a deep connection to you. I want to be there for you in whatever way I can. So, I again invite you to reach out if you have any reason to. I welcome it.
100%. 100%. Listen, community, please tap into what JD is doing. Tap into her podcast, which I was honored to be on. There's a part 1 and a part 2. So please go over there and support her work.